this so long story short, right? Academia is really it's really not it sometimes. Don't be convinced that academia is the only way you can be successful in your life. But I've spent all of this time talking about medicine, talking about exploitation of medical students, talking about a degree, an area of study that I have no personal experience in. So I want to talk about something I actually do have personal experience in, and that is doing an arts degree. So, a lot of universities, and I'm pretty sure this is the case like universally, not just in Australia, where universities will have a certain number, a roster of corporations or organizations that have a business partnership with the university. So yeah, they will have a collaborative partnership where, at some point in your arts degree, you will have to do a unit, a group project unit, right? And essentially what happens is in these groups, these corporations that the university is partnered with will come forward with problems that they want solved. And your subject for that particular semester in that unit will be, in your groups, to solve that problem or try to come up with a solution that these organizations can implement, right? So, the thing is, right, generally speaking, this is like internship light, right? You get some experience working for a corporation, and in return, well, we'll get to what you get in return later. So, usually these group projects are absolute plagues upon your university experience because you get one of three extreme outcomes. Either you are an absolute chimpanzee, you get put in a group where people actually care about whatever problem you're supposed to solve, and you spend the entire semester kind of bludging the subject and getting carried by everyone else. Or, even worse, you are the one human being amidst a crowd of chimpanzees, and you have to do your best, grow an extra pair of arms, and carry this project to completion just so you can pass. Not to mention that your feedback doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't really, well, it might impact their grades at the end of the day, but probably not enough to actually stop them from graduating. On a slightly different tangent, and this is something I brought up in like my last stream as well. I really do believe that you should have an MMR system in group projects for university where they collect all of your student feedback forms at the end of each subject, and they give you like a score where people with really low scores beneath a certain threshold can only ever be put in groups with other people with similarly low scores in group project subjects. Anyway, so this is like the second extreme. The third extreme, and this is the ideal scenario, at least on paper. You get put with the dream team, a bunch of people who not only are just as competent as you, but just as motivated as you as well. You communicate well, you share a vision, and you have the resolve to get shit done. I've experienced both of these extremes, by the way. Thankfully, I haven't been doing this, but yeah, both of these they are interesting in different ways. Now, the problem is, regardless of which of these three extremes you become a part of, you never really win. Because if with these two, it's pretty obvious why. In this case, you are the problem. In this case, you have to, bear through a problem. But with this, in the case that you come up with a solution, well, this can end in one of two ways. Either the solution you make is not that exceptional, in which case, you graduate, you get those credit points, you leave the course, you're fine, right? And the corporation leaves being kind of nonplussed, not really caring, whatever, right? Or you come up with an idea that is so good that it might actually be implemented, but you might not actually get anything in return for it. And this is what brings me to the next part. So, when you do these group projects, before you start on any of these projects, you have to sign something called a deed poll, or basically a contract. Now, these contracts are necessary to sign. You can't do the subject unless you sign this contract. And this contract has two parts to it. One, which is basically an NDA, so saying that you won't disclose any internal information that the company reveals to you while you're doing your project so you can do your project, which is, again, like, fair enough, right? And again, I'm pretty sure this is a surviving contract. So even after you finish, you can't disclose this information. And the second part, though, is that anything you make over the course of your project has its intellectual rights transferred over to the company that is, partnered with the university while you do this project. And normally, if this was a unit, I don't have a problem with this with this contract being compulsory to sign to do that unit if it was an optional unit, right? If this was an optional unit, it was your choice whether you did it or not. Yeah, fair enough. You know what you're getting into. You just sign away your property rights, whatever, right? But the problem is, if you want to graduate, you have to do at least one of these subjects if you do an arts degree. Which means that you're kind of in a bit of a lose-lose situation. So either you don't put in any effort at all, and if you actually care about whatever you put out, then I guess that's kind of rough. Or you do care, you do something great, and it just gets yoinked. There is no stipulation that they have to compensate you in any way, shape, or form. Right? So they just get whatever you make for free, and they don't have to even acknowledge that you're the one who came up with it. They don't have to credit you in anything, right? Look, if there's anyone who's watching this, if you're watching the VOD or you're watching it live, right? Anyone in my audience, if you're doing an arts degree, if you're in the later stages of doing an arts degree, just become a stripper. The work is more intellectually honest. The exploitation is less degrading, and you get paid money for objectifying yourself. So, yeah, but anyways, so not only is this a compulsory subject if you actually want to graduate, but it's a compulsory degree, it's a compulsory contract that you need to sign if you actually want to be able to do the subject. Now, that's not to say that there are zero incentives for trying your best, right? So I basically did one of these subjects where there were two incentives. One, the subject was, it was one where we were paired with a pretty big news broadcaster in Australia. Two, the subject was double weighted, which means that it was a single subject that you did that would count for double the amount of credit points that a single subject usually does. So, or become a VTuber. True and real. Although, I will say that there's a good chance that strippers get paid more consistent money than VTubers. But yeah, so that was the first incentive, right? Big well-known partner, double-weighted unit. The other incentive, and this was more unofficial, was that our unit coordinators told us, right when we were at the beginning stages, first 2 weeks of starting this unit in semester, they told us that if we did particularly well, if our project was particularly helpful to this corporation, we would get letters of recommendation. Basically, a reference letter that you could put into your resume. And, of course, as somebody who was at the time looking to enter traditional media industry after graduating, this got my attention. Because, let's be honest, the last thing that people are going to read in your job application is your resume. Especially if you're in media, right? And in your resume, the last thing they will read in your resume is the stuff you say about yourself. If anything, they'll look at your portfolio, they'll look at your referees, and then they'll look at your references. And then if those look good, they'll consider reading whatever it is you've written about yourself, right? But again, references are actually worth something. People say that being paid in clout isn't real. But just as how clout is valuable if you're able to translate it into something concrete on the internet, a reference is valuable if you're able to translate it into a successful career in traditional media. Again, I want you to keep this in the back of your mind. We were told that we would get letters of recommendation if our project was particularly good. Now, this particular business partner, this media organization that was approaching us with a problem that they wanted to solve, right? They had a problem that could be summed up in one sentence. L plus ratio plus you fell off. Essentially, what was happening is they were trying their best to move all of their content online, right? But nobody gave a shit that they had moved online. They had no audience, right? They weren't pulling anything with their social media presence. And the problem, the specific question that we were assigned, like the specific problem that we were told to look at, is how are content creators taking over the areas of edutainment or news reporting or whatever that traditional media used to be, responsible for, and how can this particular company emulate that success, right? Quite literally, they were worried about getting ratioed by fucking content creators, and they wanted to get an idea of how they could get in on that action, right? That sweet, sweet audience. So, this was the issue we were faced with. And again, like I said before, this was the dream team. I had a bunch of people who were with me who were really motivated to get those letters of recommendation and who were competent enough to work together towards that. So, we did our initial research, right? We looked at the company's analytics. We looked at what their content was like. We did some analysis on all the different social platforms they were posting content to, how they were doing their content. They had tried content creator collabs in the past. They've done it fluctuates in how successful it was. So we looked at those as well, and we looked at the areas of content that they wanted to go into and how the conventions and stuff, how those were done, etc., as well as doing audience surveys among other young people, because that was the primary audience that they wanted to get at, right? Young people on social media, young people on the internet. So we did a survey of those people to try and find out what wasn't working. So just talk behind an anime girl and problem solved. Unironically, I brought up VTubers at the end of this project to this company. But anyways, that's a different thing that we'll get to in a bit. So, at the end of this initial research process, and that was quite a lot of research, bear in mind, we came up with 3 main problems that they needed to address. The first thing, nobody knew who the fuck they were. In terms of exposure, they were getting absolutely blasted they were getting blasted out of the water by other content creators, individual content creators, etc. Part of this has to do with the way that they were doing collaborations, because what we realized was, even though they had tried to do collaborations with content creators in Australia that were decently big on their own accounts or on various media platforms like YouTube, like TikTok, like Instagram, they would host all of the collabed content on their own social media accounts that nobody knew about. So immediately you have a little bit of an exposure deficit there. The second thing is that people younger audiences especially, were turned off by the sort of manufactured tone that came across in the way that content was presented. A specific question that we asked was, why don't you consume news from traditional media outlets? And a large part of it was them saying, and I say this word for word, we don't like newscaster voices. And we don't like the fact that a newscaster voice is coming from a giant corporation. Now, I want to stress, newscaster voice on its own, not a problem. False ID does it. But the reason why it works with False is that False isn't a soulless corporation. When False does his newsreader accent, right? It's like a part of his personal brand. It's his personal shtick. It has, it has sass, pizzazz, personality, all of which are devoid when it's a corporation trying to speak to you, right? So again, on top of that, there's an overall tone of artificiality. And part of that also comes from the problem of the way that they were editing their content. So essentially what would happen is they would post content onto these platforms, but they wouldn't adhere to any of the common conventions in how that content was packaged, how that content was edited. So again, they would be posting tons of videos and stuff, tons of shorts, but none of them would gain any traction because again, people would be scrolling through their timelines, and on the off chance that one of this corporation's stuff would come up, they would just go, "What the fuck is this?" and scroll right past it. So these were the 3 problems that we identified, and halfway through the semester, we were supposed to do a presentation where we told them about these problems, and that's exactly what we did. And at this point, the execs kind of took notice a little bit of our group in particular. They were like, "Yep, you guys seem really competent. We all trust you to look in that. We all trust you. If you say this is the problem, this is the problem. Go and solve it, right? Go and show us how we can solve it." And so that's exactly what we did. They had three main platforms that their content was concentrated on: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Again, we were in a group of 5, right? So naturally, just to divide up the labor a little bit. So for context, 2 of us had experience with making content for these platforms in particular. One of us had, there was one other girl in the group who, prior to doing this unit, had been part of a program by the university and been put in charge of growing their social media account on TikTok and Instagram to help promote this program. Now, she did that very successfully, but at the end of that particular semester, I believe, or at the end of that year where she was asked to take on this role, the university decided to terminate that program, and all of that work just kind of went to waste, right? But again, the fact remains, she has experience with working these platforms. I have experience editing videos. I also watch a lot of YouTube. I've written essays about how YouTube videos are made, how they're supposed to be appealing, what makes YouTube an appealing platform to both creators and audiences alike, right? So this is something that I have a lot of experience in. So again, we are walking into this with 2 people that have at least a little bit of prior experience with how to manage social media content, how to make social media content. So we divided each of these apps up amongst the 5 of us. So 2 of them would be handling Instagram, 2 of them would be handling TikTok, and I would be taking on YouTube. The first thing I did when I started actual research, thou sayest. So she was the social media manager. Yeah, exactly. And she got kind of fucked over for that. But yeah, so as part of the first thing I wanted to do, right? Because I pointed out that editing was a problem. I wanted to take a specific video, right, and show them the difference between a video that was edited properly and a video that wasn't. So this was their YouTube channel at the time that we began this project. I'll give you a few seconds to see if you see something a little strange about this channel. False is not condescending either. Yeah, that's a big part of why False is why False works, I guess. Wait. Yeah. Yep. This was a channel with almost 400k subs, almost 3k videos, and at the time, their videos were pulling in routinely less than 1,000 views. Now, again, I do want to say, if this was another creator, I would not be doing this kind of number shaming. But this is a media corporation, right? This is a media corporation worth billions of dollars. So this is not okay. Something is going very wrong here. And I took some of the content and I realized what was going on. So essentially, there was a twofold problem. One, half of their content was completely unedited, right? So it was basically someone talking to camera with no live chat, no viewer interaction or anything like that. Just footage of them talking at a camera, unedited, right? Just uploaded wholesale to their channel. And of course, that's not going to do well. What are you thinking? The second thing is, even when there is some level of movement or some sort of dynamicism in the shot, all of that was done in camera on site. So one of the initial reactions that I got when we showed this content to other people of our age, right, was, I feel fucking seasick. Because instead of doing the normal person thing and editing in post so that the camera moves around, they would try to move around the camera while they were filming. So you would just get this sort of again, it's not a problem, but it's just very different to what you're used to seeing on YouTube, right? So what, Lamau? There was no editing. Yeah, there was no editing. So I took it upon myself to take one of those videos and re-edit it and then show it to them on the day. Give them an example. And while this was going on, this was a video that had, your usual cuts, pans, zooms, vine booms, a whole bunch of sound effects, memes, whatever, right? And yeah, so I went and did that. So, at the end of the day, right, at the end of the semester, when we had to put all of what we've come up with together, we basically suggested that they fix these 3 problems in the following ways. So first off, right, regarding the first 2 issues, that they have not enough exposure and that they're not relatable enough to their audience, right, we decided that they were already doing content creator collabs, which was good, but but they needed to change the way that they were doing them. Instead of just doing content creator collabs where they would host the content exclusively on their own social media accounts, we suggested that they adopt more of like an agency slash MCN approach, where they would lend the only thing that they do still have over, your smaller content creators, which is equipment and personnel, that they would lend these services out to content creators in return for being credited in the content that they posted to their own channels, right? This is the equivalent of Boomer. Oh, yes, it was. So that was our first suggestion, right? Both of these situations to be solved through changing the way that they approach content creator collabs. Because again, content creators have that relatability that these corporations struggle to have. And also, they don't need exposure from these corporations. Either pay them money to make content for you, in which case, that's what they were doing before, but the problem is they had lack of exposure. So either pay them money or lend them the equipment and get your name out that way, right? Ironically, through exposure. Because if you have a bunch of Australian creators that say that they were able to make the content with the help of this corporation, then naturally their audience will become aware that this corporation even exists. So that was the first part of our solution. Second part, a complete overhaul of the way that they were editing the content that they were posting online. And this is where I came in, right? So in our final presentation, this is such a surreal thing to think about, because it was just like me standing up at the front of like a lecture hall talking to a bunch of fucking suits and execs about memes in video editing. It was just me like lecturing them on the value of using a Vine boom or cutting away from text before people even have the chance to read it in the middle of a shot. So that particular memory is one that I particularly treasure when I look back on the things that I've done in my university degree. But yeah, so it was basically just like me explaining, okay, this is how you can improve your editing. This is why it sucks at the moment. This is how you can make it better. And the entire thing boiled down to hire an editor. For fuck's sake, hire an editor that can edit for the internet, for YouTube, for TikTok, and not for like television. Because the two editing styles, completely different beasts. I've been taught how to do both, but I mean, like, obviously I favor the first one a bit more. So, yeah. The DNA of the soul. Yeah, that was basically me. That was basically what I told them. Now, it does need to be said that the way that I speak might come across as a little, like, sardonic, a little critical, right? The presentation was, like, good, right? And our unit coordinator who was there at the time did assure us that it was like good, but she did pull me aside at the end to say like, your presentation was great, your delivery was awesome, but you didn't have to go so hard on roasting them about their content. So maybe on some degree I did accidentally go a little too hard. I didn't say like anything. I didn't insult them directly, right? I just said your content, from all the criticism or all the feedback we've been getting from our audience, was just, that it was boring, right? That was pretty much it. But again, I understand that particular criticism. To be fair, my tone of voice does lend itself more to like being a little like roasty, sarcastic kind of like tone rather than anything else. They got very possibly. So yeah, we did this presentation. We got a standing ovation, a pat on the ass. We got told that we did a great job by the execs. And at the end of it, we were told about what we would actually get out of all of this. Because we were the group that qualified for those letters of recommendation. The only thing that we weren't told is that these letters of recommendation weren't going to come from the organization that we'd been doing this for, but from our unit coordinators. Now, I don't want to make it out as if these unit coordinators are like nobodies. They have decades they are like retired professionals who have spent decades in Australian traditional media industry, right? They have some form of industrial clout, but their letters of recommendation aren't going to be worth nearly as much as one from one of the largest broadcasters in Australia, or an exec from one of the largest broadcasters in Australia. And again, this letter was a large part of the reason why I even bothered to do all of this in the first place. And I get that, like, you know, I get that it probably wasn't on purpose that they tried to, they probably weren't trying to mislead us on purpose, but it really felt like a punch in the gut to be told that. Also, one other thing, and I thought this was kind of funny. So, for context, in each semester has like its own census date, which is, like I said before, the date where your studies are locked in, where your debt can no longer be refunded, etc., etc., right? For us, in this semester, our census date was in week 5 of that semester. So, because this is a subject that requires a deed poll, we had to sign this contract and turn it in before week 5 in order to actually do this subject. Before week 2, actually, to do this subject. So, by the end of week 5, we were locked into doing this course. On week 6, we had a lesson where our lecturer emphasized the importance of reading through contracts before you sign them. And it was just really funny because the moment she said that, you could hear like the slightest trace of the softest snicker ripple out throughout the classroom, because all of us knew we had all been essentially forced to sign a contract that we had no choice in, and to give us this lesson 1 week after we could no longer take it back was really rich. So again, this wasn't like, I don't think this was on purpose. I think it was just a case of being oblivious and, you know, painfully unaware. But it was just, again, it's like one of those moments that add up, right? To when all you can do is kind of just laugh. So yeah. So that happened. So yeah, at the end of the day, we finished this project. It's presumably very helpful. The company's grateful. We get our letters of recommendation, although not the ones we were anticipating. 2 weeks after our presentations are finished, 2 weeks after the semester is finished, I get a message in our group chat. It's a screenshot of a LinkedIn post. Basically, one of the execs had just posted an advertisement for a new creator program that they were launching, right? Where they would get creators to sign on, make content for that company, and that would be posted onto social media. And guess what other role was advertised in this call out? A video editor. Fancy that. So, naturally, we had received no word from the company afterwards, right? And by the way, I only found out that the letters of recommendation was from our coordinators rather than from the company itself, because after like 2 weeks of silence, I emailed one of the execs whose email addresses we'd been given to complete the project and asked if we could get a letter of recommendation for like everyone in the group. And he was like, nah, just go to your unit coordinator for one. So that's how I found that out. So again, already a little similar to some of the stuff that we were talking about in our presentation, right? But it is worth saying, this isn't the first time that they've done a creator program. Right? So I wasn't going to immediately say, yeah, this was totally a ripoff of what we suggested, even if this does make me very suspicious. But then I went to search it up myself, and I looked at some of the promotional material that they were releasing on social media to attract content creators. And they had done a short where, and this is the smoking gun, that it actually was inspired by what we were suggesting. They had an advertisement where they were basically doing like a little skit where a creator that they had already collabed with was like, acting out the motions of what it would be like to be part of this program. And they had a section at the end where the creator was talking to camera behind a news desk, and someone off screen says, word for word, no, say that again, but without newscaster voice. And that was the moment where we all collectively went, okay, what the fuck? Because we, again, no credit, no letter of recommendation, and this has all actually been used in their promotional stuff, if not being used in the program itself, right? So, yeah, that's how that ended. So, again, After all of this, right, understandably, I would say, I was a little disillusioned with my degree. But it wasn't until like weeks after that semester that it fully began to sink in just how little I had come to care for my degree. Because again, like I said, on paper, I had I had completed the necessary components to say that I have the knowledge that my degree should be giving me. So it was at this stage that I kind of had a moment where I, if I'm being completely honest, got a little lost. I had a bit of an, and this is something that every uni student can probably relate to especially towards the end of their degree. I didn't know what the fuck to do with my future. Because, like, once you do this, I'm sure an internship isn't going to be exactly like this, but this is what it's like to work in the traditional media industry. And after going through this, fuck no, I wasn't going to do that. I mean, that's common bait if they know what you want. Yeah, that is. I did have a bit of an identity crisis. Because the hard part about doing a media degree is that almost everything you learn, and I mean the things that are actually part of like the media part of your degree, not like whatever fluff your university wants to tack onto your degree. Everything you learn is relevant to everyday life. Everything you learn is knowledge that can protect you from being exploited, manipulated, etc. by, gigantic tech corporations, news media organizations, or even just bad faith creators, right? All of it is important. But the more you learn, the more you understand, the higher the risk that you just check out of anything to do with traditional media, especially journalism. Because, like, if you have eyes, if you've been taught to see and you look around, things are fucked.